Hello, my name is Doug Leasure. Thank you for joining me for another training session on Active Planner. And we just finished up a training session looking at the basics of the calculation engine and the basics of creating a formula, a calculation formula. And so what we want to do now is to build on what we've learned in the previous training session and look at formulas, calculation formulas that retrieve values from other plan sheets. So let me start with the plan sheet we created previously, and let's do just a little bit of a quick cleanup on here so we are prepared to do what we want to cover today in our training session. So I'm just going to clear the values here from the plan sheet, and let's go ahead and remove the calculations we created in the prior training session. Calculation, cut, so everything is gone. Okay, so now that we have a clean sheet, let's go ahead and save it and we'll get started. So the first thing we want to look at is retrieving values from other plan sheets. So if we take a look at the calculation, and for our prior actual group we want to retrieve values based on the account number 6100-800-00 from another plan sheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a formula for our prior actual group. We're going to create a brand new formula, and then this will be a plan sheet based on the account number. Okay, so plan sheet lookup based on account numbers. So we'll create the formula key and description. We'll go to the formula tab, and in the formula type, we have three formula types here that do lookups based on plan sheets. Plan sheet account number, which we're going to use, plan sheet based on row ID, and published data. So let's start with the plan sheet lookup based on the account number. And in the column that says balance code, this is where we can point to the specific plan sheet that we want to use for our source as our source of our values. So we're going to point to the plan called 2011, FY 2011. That's our plan. The particular sheet we're going to look at is we're going to point to the department 100-800, North American IT department, and our group will be our prior actual group. And we just see those selections reflected here in this the dialog box here. We'll click OK, and it drops that information into our balance code. The last thing then is we need to specify the account number that we're retrieving. And as we learned in the previous training session, yes, we could type the account number in, etc., but we really want to use the masking capabilities. So let's mask the account number so that this same formula can be used on row 2, just like it can in row 3. It can be used in various plan sheets. And so now let's go ahead and save our formula as a global formula. In fact, let's delete. I accidentally saved it as a plan sheet formula. So let me delete that, which is we're deleting the sheet level formula, and select global, and now we'll save it as a global formula. Okay, and yes, we want to apply this formula to our prior actual group. And so if we refresh the calculations here, does what's called a budget query, where it's retrieving values in from other budget plan sheets. And there we just pulled in the values from our department 100-800 plan sheet. Okay, let's build on what we've done so far, and let's take this same formula, the plan sheet account formula, and let's apply it to our year-to-date total for the prior prior actual group. So I'm going to select the formula, the calculation type of formula. Let's do a lookup and find the plan sheet account formula. And let's click OK. And so now if we come over here to our group called the prior actual group, we currently have a cell formula in there, so let's delete that because we have applied a calculation to it. And the calculation is defined to go get values then from the prior actual group, and yet our, I guess what's a little interesting here is we're applying that to our group here, which is our year-to-date column. And if you remember, that's defined as going from date January 1st through December 31st, reflecting or representing all 12 columns, all 12 periods within the fiscal year. And so if we refresh the calculation here, what we see returned here is actually the annual amount. So what's interesting is the way Active Planner is retrieving values then from the plan sheet, from that source plan sheet, is in a way very similar to what it's doing when it's retrieving values then from the general ledger. It has the smarts, it has the intelligence then to go grab values from that group, but because our column that we're retrieving it in is defined as an annual column, that is, it covers all 12 periods, the calculation when applied to this column, this group of columns, this column, it will then retrieve all 12 periods and aggregate it together. So that's a very, very powerful concept in that Active Planner is retrieving values then based on the dates that are represented in our columns, just like it does when we're retrieving balances then from the general ledger. So let's take that one step further and apply the same calculation then to our actuals. Right? We're using this calculation, this formula, and we're going to apply that formula then to our actual group. So this global formula applied to the actual group. And so now if I come over here to our actual group and I refresh the calculation here, doesn't matter if I choose one or multiple, let's just choose one cell, refresh the calculation on that one cell, and what we'll see then is actually kind of an error condition here. Cannot find the appropriate balance for our FY 2011 plan, our Department 100-800 sheet, and our prior actual group. Now, this exists, the plan exists, the sheet exists, the prior actual group exists, but the reason we got the error message and we retrieved no value then from that plan sheet is within that group, no values within there are, I'm sorry, that group contains no values where the date is January of 2011, because that particular group contains values for January 2010 through December 2010. So that group does not contain values that match the dates in our actual column. So again, just trying to emphasize that it's treating that group of data in a very similar way to the way it would treat balances in our general ledger. Okay, so let me undo that and set our actual group then to a source net change. And in a similar way, we would want to not use any formula then for our year-to-date totals. Okay, and so let's do a little bit of cleanup here then. For our year-to-date actual, let's just simply copy our sum formula then and apply that to our year-to-date total. All right, So if we refresh the calculations in the entire range, what we will see then is that we are retrieving values then from the plan sheet for prior actual, calculating our budget based on those values, and then in our actual column, retrieving values from the general ledger. Okay, now let's take what we've learned and extend it a little bit further. Let's take a look at our calculation here. And in fact, we probably don't, this one could care less about for what we're doing, looking at the simple source net change, because we already understand that. But let's instead take a look at our formula and extend it a little bit further. Okay, let's say that our goal is to retrieve values for 6,000 location 100, as well as location 200. So we can use a formula then that says we want to go to department 100-800 and retrieve the values there, and that would be for location 100. And once we get the values from there, we want to add another row where we are doing a similar plan sheet lookup coming from department or location 200. Okay, so it's going to go to this plan sheet and bring in the values in for location 100, and then go to this plan sheet and bring in the values for location 200. So if we refresh a couple of the cells here, you can see that we're actually bringing values from two plan sheets and adding them together. All right, let's continue to build on what we're learning so far. And what I would like to do is go ahead and get rid of this row and the operand here. So we're just focusing on a single row. And let's put back our full masking here. Okay, when we built this formula initially, we were pointing to a specific plan sheet, a specific plan sheet, and a specific group. Now, typically, we want to save these formulas as global formulas, use them throughout the various plans, throughout the various plan sheets. And so we want these formulas to be as generic as possible. So the way we accomplish that is that we would use, in our plan sheet lookup, we would use this option for plan, that is our current plan. What that means is whichever plan I'm in when I'm doing this calculation, when we process the calculation, we will look inside of our current plan. So it means this formula then truly is global. It'll work for any plan that we are using. For the sheet, though, we typically 99% of the time we have to point to a specific plan sheet, and so we would always point to the plan sheet we care about. And then for the group key, we can also use the current group so that this one formula then would work equally well for the actual group as it would for the prior actual group, so that the source would be whatever group we're applying the calculation to. So this is how we would typically set up this type of a formula in a very generic way, using the current plan and the current group. And save that. And if we refresh the calculations, it will do what we've asked it to, bringing back the values in from the current plan and based on the group in which we have assigned the calculations. All right, next thing we want to look at would be the idea of using the published data. And so when we look at pulling values from multiple plan sheets, you can see that you saw that we were able to create a two-row formula that pulled values from one specified plan sheet and add that to values from a second specified plan sheet. Well, you can see where this would be very, very complicated to pull values in from multiple plan sheets if we have, let's say, 300 plan sheets in our plan. And so what Active Planner does is it gives us the ability to grab values based on what's called the published data. And that just simply means when the plan sheets were saved, not only do the values exist inside of the individual plan sheets, but those values are also taken out of the individual plan sheet and stored in what's called the published data tables. So just a table within a database that contains the values from all of the plan sheets. And so let's take a look at building one of those type of formulas. So let's go ahead and take our calculation where we've created a formula to retrieve plan sheet values based on the account, and let's go ahead and modify that. So first of all, it's going to be based on the published data. Okay. So let's change our plan sheet key. And then let's change the formula type. And we're going to point to the published data as the formula type. And when we do that, we get a button over here called Pub Data. When we click on that, it gives us a form that we can use to specify the data that we're retrieving. First thing we see when we look at this is that it is pointing to a particular company, and we can choose a company that we want to retrieve data from. And regarding the plan, by default it's using all question marks, or it's masking the plan, meaning look inside of my current plan. And that's typically, even though we can specify the plan, we typically would, again, to make this as generic as possible, leave the masking for the plan. The next thing we need to do is develop which data are we looking for. And so we are looking for things based on the account number or the account dimension. And so let's do a lookup and choose the accounts as our dimensional value. The next thing we need to do is tell it which sheets we're looking for. Yes, we could specify a specific sheet here, but our best bet is to use the asterisk, meaning we want to look in all of the sheets throughout the plan in order to retrieve the data we're looking for. Next thing is to look at the group, and again, we could specify a group, or we can leave the better solution is to use the masking here for the group, so that it'll base the lookup based on the group in which we're applying this calculation, this formula. And what valuation, again, net change, beginning balance or ending balance, so we'll leave it as net change. And the last thing, we can specify the account number. Again, we could type in a specific account number, but in order to make it as generic as possible, we will go ahead and mask the full account number so that it will take the value of the account number then from the row in which we're applying this calculation. And because the values can come from many, many different plan sheets, we have an option here to do what's called audit the output, which simply means when it processes the calculation, it will give us in our report form information about what plan sheets were used as a source for the values that are returned. So we're going to go ahead and turn that on. We'll click OK. We're on, our type is global formula, so we'll go ahead and save that, insert a new record, And yes, we want to apply this formula. Okay, so we're applying our pub data based on the account number formula. So let's go ahead and retrieve the values here for just one of the cells. And we're going to refresh the calculation here. And now in the report, we get some additional information here because of the audit. And so what we can see as we read down through here is that on row 2, in the column called the prior actual 1, we are auditing the calculation there. And it tells us that in row 1 of the calculation, there was a PDR, or a published data retrieval type of a calculation. And it's retrieving data from the company called Training, from the plan called Fiscal Year 2011, from the group called Prior Actual. And then we can see that it is finding data in a sheet called Child, which has values, or they found values in there, or columns with beginning date January 1 through January 31st, 2010. And within that column, it found account number 6,100,800,00 that had a value of $37,134.37. And it also found a similar piece of information or data then from Sheets Department 100-800. And it also found a similar set of data for Department 200-800. But from there it returned $0. It also found values in Sheet IT Summary and Sheet Parent. Now, fortunately, it brought back no dollars from those sheets, but it did find values in there. And so what we want to do is now take a look at the publishing options within the various plan sheets, because what we're seeing here as we look at this report is that we're getting values from the sheets we care about, but also values from sheets that we don't want data retrieved from. And so what that tells us is we have a problem with our publishing. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to save this sheet. And let's start by looking within this current sheet. If we look at the sheet options, and then the other tab, one of the things we see here, one of the options here is where we can indicate whether the values from the sheet should be published or not published. So in our calc sheet, we are not publishing these values, but in our other plan sheets, we are publishing values there. And in fact, we saw that the IT Summary Department, or summary sheet, if we open that up and take a look at it, we can see that the values from this sheet are indeed being published. And this is actually not correct. We should not be publishing values in our summary sheet, because we've already published the detail down in the child sheets here. This is an aggregation of those sheets. So the detail sheet should be published. A summary sheet is typically never published. So we will unpublish this sheet and save it. And while we're here, let's take a look at the facility summary sheet. And yes, it is also published. So let's remove the publishing and save it. And then let's take a look at our overhead summary. And unpublish that as well. So now all of our summary level sheets are unpublished. Okay, the next thing we need to take a look at then would be, we saw that we also were getting some values in from this branch of these plan sheets. And again, these are some things we did in looking at some of our earlier training sessions, and we should not have published these sheets. So let's take a look at removing the publishing from a slightly different perspective, and that is looking at removing it for the entire branch. So I'm going to click on the grandparent, and look at our branch manager. So right-click on grandparent, choose branch manager, and one of the items we have in branch manager is the ability to modify the publishing for the entire branch. I can turn on publishing, or I can remove publishing for the entire branch. And we'll click OK here, and we'll see that it updates the publishing options then for the entire branch. And if we go back then to our calc sheet and refresh the calculation here, now as we look at the report, we can see that it is looking in Department 100-800 and retrieving the value of $37,134.37. And even though it's finding a similar number in Department 200-800, it is not retrieving any values from there because it only matched the full account number in our first sheet for Department 100-800. And so the result comes back is the total of $37,134.37, the correct amount. Okay, so now that helps us to understand how the published data retrieval formula works. And once we have it working correctly, then we would want to go back and turn off the audit list. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of extra information in the report whenever you refresh the calculations. So once we use that for testing and debugging, and then we turn it off once we have everything working correctly and save that. Okay, so we've covered the plan sheet lookup by account number. We've covered the published data retrieval, and now we want to take a look at another option where we can look at creating what's called the assumption sheet, or the plan assumption, sometimes referred to as global assumptions, where we can actually this would be a plan sheet that would be typically managed and maintained by the financial team, where they can put some of those assumptions that they would use across the entire plan. They can create those assumptions and maintain them there. So let's go ahead and take a look at, first of all, let's go ahead and do some cleanup here, a little bit of cleanup work. So we'll go ahead and cut our calculation. And once again, we'll go ahead and clean up all of the values here. So we'll clear the values. And then the goal of this next part of our training would be to bring in assumptions. So we have, when we created these sheets previously, we were allowing the ability for the department manager to enter his own assumptions. So now we want to take a slightly different approach where we want the financial team to actually create and manage the assumptions that would be used here. So let's go ahead and let's insert a couple rows here. And let's say that our goal is to insert assumptions, a default increase percentage. That will be created and maintained by the financial team. Okay, so we would want to, let's say we want to bring that into our first column here. Now again, calculations can only be applied to groups. So if we take a look at our first column here, it is not part of any group. So what we want to do is we want to, first of all, modify this and assign it to a group. And let's for the group name, let's just make it increase. So that'll be our group name and description. We'll make it relative, set it to type actual, and save that. So now our first column here is part of a group, which means we can apply a calculation to that. And what we want to do then is to is to go ahead and what we'll be typing here is a percentage. So let's take a quick second and format the cell to a percentage. Good. So what I want to do at this point is to go ahead and save the plan sheet. Well, actually, what I want to do is save it as another sheet. And what we'll do in there is we'll go ahead and put in our percentage that we want to use, and then we'll come back here and finish up the process of using the percentage from that other plan sheet. So let's go ahead and save this as our assumption sheet. Insert a new record. And so now we're creating our assumption sheet. And so let's say in here we want to use the default increase percentage. Now what we're going to do here is let's go ahead and expose one of our columns or unhide our row ID column, because I want to use this same verbiage here as my row ID. So in our row ID we have the word default space increase space percentage, and one of our plan sheet lookups that we have available to us is a lookup based on a row ID. So I'm going to show you how that works. And so we have a row ID set to be that verbiage, default increase percent. And what we'll do is we'll put in a 2.5% value here. And again, this assumptions sheet would be created and maintained by the financial team. And so let's go ahead and save this. Go back to our calculation sheet, and what we're going to do is to go ahead and unhide the row ID here. Okay, and so we want the same verbiage that we used in our assumption sheet here in our row ID here. And whatever value we bring in here, okay, we will want to apply that to each of our specified columns. And so let's say we want to use the default increase then for our salaries. So what I want to do is to take this and protect it, and change the background to white because it's no longer going to be an entered value. And we're going to say whatever is entered in, whatever is brought into our increase column in O1, that's what we want to use then for this for our salaries increase. So let's make the row number absolute so that I can then copy this down to our other rows, our other salary and payroll expense rows. Okay, so whatever comes in here then will be applied to all of our salaries and payroll expenses. So the last thing we need to do is to create the calculation to bring in the default increase then from the assumption sheet. So this will be for the increase group, it will be a formula. It will be a new formula, which will be bringing values in from the assumptions. Based on the row ID. Based on the row ID. So this will, for the formula type, it will be a plan sheet lookup based on the row ID. And as we learned before, the balance code will be set to plan. The sheet will be the assumptions sheet, and the group will be the current group. And the last thing is in the parameter, we need to fill in the value that we're going to look up. So yes, we could type in default increase, okay, but we're better off to use the masking, which means simply whatever we enter in the row ID, we will populate parameter 1 with that value and then process the calculation. So that allows this plan sheet lookup based on the row ID to be very generic, and we can just simply enter in the appropriate row IDs in the rows where we want to use this formula. Let's make sure it's global, save it, and when we exit, we can apply this formula. And so now when we refresh the calculation for this cell, we can see that it retrieves the 2.5% as defined by our financial team and applies it to these particular rows. Okay, now let's build on that a little bit further, because the reality is we typically would apply a different percent to the salaries, different than we would to, say, the payroll tax, the workers' comp, the health insurance. Typically, these would be different percentages. So let's see how we can easily accomplish that. So let's start by going over to let's see where we're at, and go over to our assumption sheet and go ahead and do a little bit of modifications here. So we have a default increase, and let's presume that this is what we're going to apply to most of the expense items over there. But we want to specify values then for the regular salaries, to the payroll, workers' comp, health insurance. Okay. So for all the other items, we will go ahead and we'll just use the default increase for those. So I just want to do some cleanup here. Let's get rid of these items that we're not using. So we're not going to do anything with those hourly accounts. We're not going to do anything with these other expenses, because we'll just apply a default increase to those ones. And let's go ahead and get rid of the title here. Okay, so the concept is we're going to have a default increase that will apply to all of our expenses, except for the regular salaries, payroll tax, workers' comp, and health insurance, because here we want to specify different values. So workers' comp will be, regular salaries will be a 3.5% increase applied there. Payroll tax will be 5%. Workers' comp will be 5.5%. Health insurance will be a 10% increase. And next thing we need to look at would be the account numbers. Do we want to apply this 3.5% to all 6,000s or to 6,100, 800, 00? It's our choice. We can be as granular as we need to be, but in our case, we don't want to take it all the way down to the account and location and department combination. We want to be a little more generic, where we want to apply this to all of the accounts that begin with 6,000. Now, if I would start to change this, the account number, okay, we see that it's going to automatically delete the description. What it's really doing is it's really going back for general ledger source data and looking for an account that is 6,000-100 with nothing else after it, and trying to find the description for that. Okay. So that when it is a fully qualified account number, it finds the correct description. Now, the description is specific to the full account number. That is, it also has embedded in it North American IT as part of its description. So the first thing we want to do is to go ahead and turn off in Active Planner. If we look at the sheet options other, we're going to turn off the thing that causes that description to automatically be entered in the row. So just dimension options, removing the check mark here so that it is no longer automatically entering the description for our account number. So let's turn that off, and now we can very quickly make the descriptions here generic, because it's not applying just to the North American IT department, but it's going to apply to all departments, all locations. So let's make that generic. And then in a similar way, let's make the account number generic, because all we really care about here is just the first segment. So it's really the 6,000, 6,100, 6,150, and 6,200. So we want these percentages to apply to the regular salaries, everything that begins with 6,000. Okay, so this is how we would set up in the assumption sheet. And now let's go take a look at how we would utilize those percentages then in our calc sheet. So for our default increase, we would want to apply the percentage there to everything that we are for which we are not doing a specific percentage. So let's utilize the default percent everywhere except for the regular salaries. In the regular salaries, in the payroll tax, workers' comp, and health insurance, we want to use a calculation to bring in a specific value, and that value will be based on segment 1 in our row, in our account number. So let's make that calculation. So this will be applied to the group called the increase group. It's going to be a formula. We're creating a new formula here, which will be from the assumptions based on the account number, and actually segment 1 of the account number. Okay, so segment 1 of the account number from the assumption sheet. It will be a global formula, and the formula is going to be a plan sheet lookup based on the account number. And we are looking in our current plan, the assumption sheet, our current group for an account that begins with whatever is entered in segment 1. And so let's save that and apply it. And now that we have this calculation created, let's copy that and paste it to payroll tax, workers' comp, and health insurance. And now you can see that when we refresh the calculations, it brings in a default increase of 2.5%, but it brings in an increase for the regular salaries of 3.5 using that new formula that we created. And for payroll tax, it goes and looks for the row that has account 6,100 and brings in the 5% there, 5.5 for workers' comp, and 10% for health insurance. And that's how we can then create an assumption sheet based on either row IDs, or we can actually take it a little more granularly and apply it to specific account numbers by using the plan sheet lookup based on the account number. So that gives us a lot of power and flexibility in creating those assumption sheets and applying those to the sheets throughout our plans and using it in many different plan sheets, same methodology. Okay, so that's what I want to cover in this session, and in a future session we will cover the database queries. That'll be quite interesting and fun. So I look forward to working with you in another training session, and thank you for joining me today.